Street side in Weber, and then cross over to the other
Recording in
side
progress.
towards the courthouse. And then we would meet at the shaded seating area by the corner of Joaquin and Weber. And then county staff's going to give you further direction there. And if you're unable to make it down the stairs, give your name to staff, and we'll make accommodations for you to wait for you in the stairwell. And your name will be provided to the Stockton Fire Department to ensure that they know who you are and where you need to go. So just kind of some safety precautions in case we need to do any kind of evacuations. But again, the restrooms are right outside the corridor, and there's a vending machine or vending machines in the break room adjacent to this room here. So I don't think we have a quorum yet, but as we start, I'm going to defer to the chair here. And are we ready to go soon? Where's Glenn? Where do you
Right behind you. I'm ready as well. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Chair.
You're welcome. Can you hear me? I got to see how close I can get to this thing. First of all, I want to take this opportunity to welcome each and every one of you to the June 30th training session here at the county for the Redistricting Committee. It's a very rewarding period in time as we continue to move forward, and we have a lot of heavy lifting over the next few months to complete, but we must begin with the proper training in order to do so. So at this time, could we please have everyone stand, and we will do the flag salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Sonia, may we have roll call, please?
Steve Brum.
Yes.
Pam Ibeck. Yes. Alice English.
Yes.
Ann Baird. Yes. Oh, excuse me. Bob Mooney. Here. James Grunsky, excuse absent. Max Vargas rescinded his appointment. Mike Merowit.
Morowit, yes, here.
Oscar Valdez.
Oscar's here.
Summer Panino. Here. Angel Ann Flores.
Angel Ann Flores.
Maybe Star. Thank you. Mamie Star. Richard Silverman.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Grunsky is not with us today because he is moving, and he is moving within the district. So he will be back with us at the next meeting. First item of business is the action item minutes from the 6-9 RAC introduction meeting. Has everyone had an opportunity to look at those at the minutes? Is there any additions, corrections that must be made? May I have a motion to approve and a second? It's been properly moved and seconded on the item to move on the minutes from the 6-9 meeting. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Anyone online? And oppose? Motion carries. The next item of business is the agenda additions and deletions. On your table, you have the RAC final schedule. We just want to add this item to the agenda. And if I could have a motion to do so, please. It's been properly moved and seconded to add the items of the Redistricting Committee of future meetings. May we roll call? So we'll have a motion has been moved and seconded. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign.
Aye.
Motion carries. Did we not? It's in the binders. Thank you. Okay, moving on to item number 5 is public comment. Do we have anyone that wishes to address the body? No public comment. Is there anyone in the audience that wishes to address the body? Seeing none, we will continue. Introduction of the RAC members, not introduced at the 6-9 meeting. So, do we have the list of? Okay, we'll go ahead. Let me begin. My name is Steve DeBrum, former mayor for the city of Manteca. Was on the council since 2003, and so and I was beat in the last election. So we can move forward. Pam?
Thank you. Pam Ibeck, former president of University of the Pacific, now retired, happily living on a few acre farm in East San Joaquin County.
Mr. Morwit.
Mike Morowit. I live in Manteca for 25 years, and I've currently served, was a past council member as well in Manteca from 14 to 18, served on the Planning Commission, currently serve on SJAFCA and LAFCO as well, and looking forward to this experience. Thank you.
Ms. Benino.
My name is Summer Panino, and I live in Lodi, born and raised in Lodi. I currently am the operations manager for a production company and gospel singer, but politics is in my blood.
Awesome. Okay, so how about the folks that are online to introduce themselves, please? Those who are on the committee?
Alice English. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Hello?
ma'am.
Okay, I'm Alice English. I served on the Tracy Transportation Commission Advisory Committee to our council and retired, and also looking forward to working with everybody on this committee. Thank you.
Thank you.
Angel
Anyone else online? Go ahead.
Angel Ann Flores. Lived in the community for over 40 years, community advocate and SUSD trustee, area 2.
Thank you very much. Anyone else? I think, did we miss anyone?
Yes, that's me, Mrs. Oscar Valdez. I live in Stockton, and I'm a general contractor, and I wanted to learn how to do the community.
Thank you, Oscar. So we got everyone now? Okay, very good. Please introduce yourself, Mamie.
I have 25 some odd years with Lodi Unified School District, and then a whole another batch of years with the San Joaquin County Office of Education. And I live in Acampo.
Very good. Thank you very much. Do we have anyone else that we have missed? Anyone else out in the audience that's on the commission? Okay, that's good. All right. Yes, sir. Right. Thank you very much. Okay, we're going to move on to item 7, RAC member disclosures. Glenn, you want to touch base on that, please? Actually, Zoe, do you want to give an explanation to the I'm not laughing.
I might not give it back. What we'll have is a standing item on the agenda, and that will be for RAC members to disclose anything that would create a conflict in regards to your ability to serve or your ability to take action on the items on that particular agenda. Generally, those will be, and I'll just give you a very high level set of examples, and then we certainly will go into these in somewhat more detail as we get into the non-training meetings in the future, but we'll lay the foundation now, and then we'll just continue to build on that understanding. So some examples would be, for example, if somebody reached out to you and you had a conversation in regards to an item that's coming before you, and you gained information in regards to that RAC item of business that gave you insight or information that other RAC members did not have. My hope and expectation and your obligation as a public official is to disclose that information at the RAC first, so everybody has that information, and second, so that it can be determined whether you have to recuse yourself from your ability to vote. Do you remain an impartial RAC member and able to vote on that item? Also, you would need to disclose any items that would create, one, a financial conflict, meaning you would be financially affected positively or negatively in regards to an action you would take on the RAC, or two, if you have a personal bias and something that gives you an inability to be objective and unbiased in your decision making on the RAC. So those are some examples of things that we would expect you to disclose, that you're obligated to disclose. If as a RAC meeting is upcoming and you have a concern or a question, feel free to reach out to me. I can give you general advice and give you the tools to get the specific information that you need. Again, we'll revisit this before the non-training meetings, where I expect we'll have more substantive issues and possible disclosures. So I'm going to hand it back to the chair, who's not paying attention to me, even though I have a microphone. Caw-caw. No, he's still not paying. Sorry. I'm not supposed to mic. So go ahead, Chair. Sorry.
Thank you very much.
Of course.
Are there any questions from the committee regarding the information provided to us? Okay, seeing none, we're going to move on to the item that was added, and that is the RAC final schedule. The individuals who are at home, I understand, have this information, and you have, this is the schedule that is in the binders, with the next meeting on 7/14, followed by 7/28 meetings, the training schedules for the second and third meetings, and then an outline of the workshops on 8/17, 9/15, and 9/29, and then followed by the meetings on 10/13, 10/27, and 11/10. So if you have that, we voted on this a little bit earlier to add this to the agenda, and now I'm looking for a motion to approve this item so we can insert it into the minutes.
Motion to approve.
It's been properly moved and seconded to add the meeting dates and the training schedule to the agenda. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. We've got
Aye.
and I got to look over to my left here. And is there any of those that abstain or wish to vote in the negative? Okay, seeing none, the motion carries. Thank you very much. Okay, we're now going to go into the training session, and I'm going to hand it over to Glenn, and he will introduce the people here that are going to provide the information.
Thank you, Steve. So we have our consulting group, Redistricting Partners, who are going to be conducting the training sessions for us, and we specifically today in the training session 2 and 3 as well, following in July. But Chris, since we have Chris here, I was going to have him introduce the speakers and also himself, because I just want to make sure and give a shout out to Chris. He's been really helpful in assisting us so we can be best prepared to assist you. So I just wanted to make sure you understand kind of that dynamic. So with that, Chris.
Thank you, Glenn. Thank you, Glenn, for that introduction. My name is Chris Chafee. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for Redistricting Partners. We'll be kind of guiding you guys through your process through, I guess, through September and into October when we present to the Board of Supervisors. We're really excited to be part of the redistricting process for San Joaquin County, and we've got an all-star panel on deck for you guys. Today's first half will be led by Connie Malloy, a former chair of the California State Citizens Redistricting Commission, and she'll be leading a discussion on roles and responsibilities of commission members or committee members. And she'll be joined by Cynthia Dye, also a former California Redistricting Commissioner, and Carlos Marquez, who was a commissioner for the 2011 San Diego City Redistricting Commission. After they go through the roles and responsibilities, the owner of Redistricting Partners, Paul Mitchell, will be taking over and going through a Redistricting 101 introduction to kind of guide you through the criteria, the traditional approaches to redistricting, and hopefully give you that foundation to really launch into the next group of meetings. So with that, I'd love to turn it over to Connie.
Chris,
Wonderful.
before we start,
Go ahead.
I have one question. Could you please, how do you want to handle questions from the group? Do you want to wait till the end? Do you want to wait as we proceed through the meeting? Okay. Okay. Connie, did you hear the question?
Well, I heard a little bit of his answer, and what I had been thinking is that I'll share a few slides. I'll invite our two panelists to join us in conversation. I'll pose some questions to them just to get things started, and then the floor is yours, and I would love to hear from the committee members any questions or ideas that the conversation sparks. And then when we transition, Paul will do his formal presentation, and similarly, we'll be able to entertain questions for that component of the training.
Thank you.
Great. Shall I dive in?
Yes.
Okay, great. I can see most of you, and I don't see you very large, so please feel free to interrupt, wave your hand to make sure that I'm tracking to how I can be most helpful to you. So my name is Connie Malloy, as Chris so graciously offered. Good afternoon, committee members. Congratulations. You know, I'm really thrilled and honored to be here, a support, and to hopefully bring in some inspiration and advice to just get you oriented to the task at hand, knowing that no two places and no two redistricting processes are exactly alike. So we all take these things with a grain of salt, and I'm sure for the next redistricting round, you will all be in the hot seat serving on panels all over the state to be able to help others who are coming in your footsteps. By day, I'm trained as a land use planner and public policy expert. I have spent the last decade or so in philanthropy at the James Irvine Foundation, overseeing the grant-making portfolio there. And the last couple of years have been serving as CEO of a family foundation. And so redistricting is something that I knew nothing about when I, like you, was placed on, in this case, it was the state level commission. Even though I was someone very active in my community, I had a lot to learn. And so I tried to design trainings and conversations that I wish that I had been privy to as I was getting started. And so it's really in that spirit that we offer some of what will come. So let me share my screen with you. Just a few slides for context. So this picture right here is a picture of the inaugural Citizens Redistricting Commission on a very important milestone day for us, which was the day that we finalized our maps across the state, which included the congressional maps, the Assembly, the Senate, and the Bureau of Equalization, which are essentially tax districts. And I look forward to you all being able to take a picture together, you know, potentially right there in front of the flag as well when you get to the finish line. We were pretty exhausted. We hadn't known quite what we were getting into. But it was a really rewarding experience. And I will say, no matter whether you are a commissioner, a committee member, if you're doing redistricting at the local level, the county level, the state level, the one thing that I think we all really have in common is that being involved in this process really deepens your love and understanding and appreciation of place. And, I heard in your introductory remarks so much, how much you love San Joaquin County. And I think that's beautiful. And I am sure that that will manifest in the district lines that you are about to draw. So just a bit about why redistricting. I'll give you a moment to read this comic. On the left, you have the public saying, "Hey, Mr. Government Official, what's going on under there?" And then the government official in the corner saying, "Trust me, you don't need to know," wearing the cloak of secrecy. So no matter what your political stripe is, redistricting has a history of having been something that's really been held close to the chest by politicians in an attempt to be able to protect their districts. And it's been something that traditionally the public has not had much awareness or engagement around. And we've been in a moment here in California, and also as well beginning at the national level, of that beginning to shift. And you all are part of the process of exploring what other ways there are to draw districts in a way that balances all the different needs and aspirations the communities have. California's redistricting story that really led us to get to a place where we have an independent commission at the state level. Just one anecdote, in September of 2001, September 12 of 2001, it was one day after the terrorist attacks of 9/11. And it was a time where many people were mourning. There was mass confusion as we were trying to figure out nationally what was happening and why. And on that next day after the attacks, our own legislature here in California rushed to finalize a set of maps that really protected Republican and Democratic seats and sort of divvied up a sweetheart deal so that business as usual could continue in politics. And I think, not having been someone who was in politics at the time, but just as a everyday citizen, something about that sat really wrong with me. And it did for a number of good government individuals and groups of all political stripes that said, something in our system is broken. What might be a better way, or a different way at least? And so that led to a lot of the movement here in California to create the Redistricting Commission at the state level. And California has also, over the years that followed, really sparked a national redistricting revolution. And you can see here, this is just a map that shows some of the states that have adopted redistricting reforms in this kind of recent past. Ohio, Michigan, Missouri, Colorado, Utah. Now, one thing I'll say is they all look a bit different. They take elements of the same concept, that it's a set of non-politicians that are drawing the lines, and they're a little bit different in terms of how they're composed, what the decision-making process is, et cetera. But they all carry that essential essence of how do we have everyday people more involved in a process, a part of our democratic system that is supposed to be in service of the people. Here we also have a roundup of cities and counties that have independent commissions. And again, there are committees, there are commissions, but this is just a snapshot. And I'm sure Paul, who will follow, can certainly add on any I may have missed. Berkeley, Chula Vista, Escondido, Oakland, Long Beach, Los Angeles, Roseville, Sacramento, San Diego City, San Diego County, Santa Barbara County, just to name a few. And this really sums up some of the commonalities and the essential, the heart and soul of what it is to be doing this redistricting work, and why folks like yourselves have been identified to sit in the seats that you're sitting. It's about centering community input and really hearing from your neighbors around what it is that they aspire to in terms of their lives and their political representation. On that inner ring, it's about creating a transparent and inclusive process. I'm sure you have a wonderful resource in your county staff that is well-versed in doing quite a bit of public engagement and soliciting members of your community to weigh in, and being able to see their neighbors in these roles is also going to be another asset, and each of you are really ambassadors to the process. And then last but certainly not least, that outer ring is about the maps and being able to adopt equitable district maps.
Can you hear me now? Yeah, we've lost about 3 minutes of audio from you, so we never heard a word that you said. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I think we could hear it. I think this issue is you couldn't hear it in the room. So Connie, maybe just back up a slide for the people that were in that room.
Sure, absolutely. Did it cut out on the slide, the national slide?
Yes.
Okay, great. I'll just go through that quickly, which is, this is a snapshot of states. These 5 states that you see highlighted are ones that adopted redistricting reforms in 2018. So Ohio, Michigan, Missouri, Colorado, and Utah, just to show that what we had done in California and modeling that it was worth experimenting on how redistricting could be done differently was something that began to take hold in other parts of the country. And here across the state, there are also a number of places, both cities and counties, in addition to the state that's now on its 2nd cycle, that also utilize some version of commissions or committees. And then in terms of your role, at its core there in the middle is really about centering community input and being able to have a broader set of voices shape what the maps ultimately look like. Creating a transparent and inclusive process. That image that you see in that middle rung is back pre-COVID, what these hearings actually looked like for people to come in and for the very first time be able to provide their perspectives. And then last but not least, there to be able to adopt the very best maps that reflect your community and also balance the complicated trade-offs that may arise in terms of communities of interest. So just to get us into the panel conversation, Chris, you already introduced me. He mentioned that Cynthia Dye will be joining, also a former commissioner at the state level, and Carlos Marquez, who was a commissioner in San Diego at the city level. Myself and Cynthia Dye were on that inaugural state level commission. It was the first time that the district lines were drawn without having that focus on incumbency or political party. And the way that that commission was designed was that it had 5 Republicans, 5 Democrats, and 4 independents. We had quite an array of backgrounds, professionally, personally, geographically, but one thing that we had in common is we were all newbies. None of us were redistricting experts. Our colleague Carlos Marquez, again, was representing San Diego in their city level commission. San Diego actually has a much longer history than most cities in having independent commissions. But in the round where Carlos served 10 years ago, they had not just the task of redrawing the existing boundaries, but the city had grown really significantly. And so they had the charge of also adding a completely new district, which, as you can imagine, had significant implications for the other districts that had been there historically. They had a number of different competing goals to be able to reconcile as they went through that process. They had a really strong and vibrant African American district and community. They had a lot of growth in their Asian Pacific Islander and Latino populations that wanted to be accommodated and heard. And also they are a city that has a really large LGBTQ population that's also very politically active. And so they really had a lot of different things to balance in their process. Your local commission is also dealing with, granted, we've made some progress, but the ongoing impacts of COVID, and it's great to see you in person in the same room, many of you. I hope you can continue to do more of that. And there are likely members of your community who may not be able to or yet feel safe to be able in person. And so being able to create the right public process that can also just accommodate to the reality of what we're living is a new challenge that you'll be navigating. So this is your chance to hear firsthand from some colleagues and friends and resources. And so I will stop sharing and just invite Cynthia and Carlos to go ahead and join on video. Wonderful.
Hello, committee members.
Welcome, Cynthia, and welcome, Carlos. We're glad to have you here.
Glad to be here.
Great. I'll just kick us off with being able to share what motivated each of you to decide to play the role of redistricting guru within your community or at the state level. And how was it similar or different to how you might have anticipated what it would be?
I'll go ahead and go first. So for me, this goes back to 5th grade when I first learned about gerrymandering. And I remember thinking about how wrong that was when I was a 5th grader. So, you know, when there was this opportunity to be part of the solution, I jumped at the chance. And I certainly was not a guru. I was actively engaged, you know, in community organizations and what have you, but and actively engaged in voting and all that, but really had no previous experience with redistricting. You know, one of the things that perhaps was a surprise, in addition to how much time it took, was just the wide array of people who took the time, you know, to come and present their views on how their district should be drawn and what kinds of issues were important to them. I remember actually hearing a lot about San Joaquin County, which had been split horribly in previous redistricting processes. And so we heard a lot of testimony from people who wanted us to try to keep San Joaquin County whole. And we did happen to have a fellow commissioner who was from Stockton. So, so that was something that was very top of mind for us.
How about you, Carlos?
Well, it's great to be with everyone. I really was motivated to apply for the San Diego City Redistricting Commission because I recognized at the time I was a community organizer that a lot of folks within my community or the sort of the communities that I existed at the intersection of were not represented in the drawing of the lines. And remember, in San Diego, we had a redistricting process led by citizens the prior decade, but even then, you know, the composition of the commission was not fully, you know, representative of the vibrant diversity of San Diego. And because the stakes were so high in 2011, recognizing that the population growth really dictated that we needed to make room for a 9th district and also try our best to provide representation for groups that had been left behind for a long time. I threw my hat in the ring, and very much, felt passionately that as an openly gay man and as someone who grew up on public assistance and Latino, that but for my representation on the commission, we might not hear from those communities. And in terms of what was surprising, I would say I got appointed when I was 25, so I should have known better. I certainly think if I was serving on a redistricting commission now, I would not be so naive. But that was really surprised that the commission was not met with any presumption of benefit of the doubt. It was rough and tumble and political from out the gate, and our motives as a collective, but also individually, were questioned. So it felt almost like we were in the spotlight of somebody who was running for Congress rather than serving on a volunteer citizen-led commission for a municipality. But it all very much, in reflection, it makes sense as to why it was so political, because the stakes are incredibly high. And so we hope to talk with you about how to weigh those equities.
Thank you both so much. I'm sure that there are similarities that may be going through the minds of the committee members here in terms of why this role. Given that you now have the benefit of hindsight, which is always 2020, want to tap into that wisdom and ask, what did you each find to be values that are important you would recommend for be they redistricting committees or commissions to be able to demonstrate, and how do you actually do that in practice? And I'll start with you, Cynthia.
Sure. Although there were 14 of us in the case of the state redistricting commission, and all of us chosen to be different and chosen to represent different aspects of California, that it was really important for us to act as an entire body. And we had a principle of consensus, acting by consensus whenever possible. And by that, I don't mean that we necessarily agreed with each other on everything, but at some point we would agree to disagree, and we would agree to move on, because it was apparent what the will of the commission was actually the direction it was going in. So that we're able to do that because in every case we made sure everyone had their opportunity to express their views, to get that on the record, and to fully understand everyone else's point of view, which might not be the same. And then we were satisfied and able to, in some cases, agree to disagree and to move on. So I think that was really important, especially as a multi-partisan commission. There were a lot of pundits who did not expect us to be able to agree on anything, much less statewide maps. So we, to the great surprise of many people who are observing the commission, we made almost all of our decisions by consensus. We very rarely took votes unless we had to. And I think that was an important value to embody. One thing we also did, Connie mentioned, and we had a rotating chair, a leadership structure. So many commissioners were part of the leadership lineup, and we rotated kind of every major set of meetings. And that was also important to demonstrate this kind of commission-wide agreement to take leadership from people from different partisan affiliations. A second big value was transparency. Connie actually mentioned that was a major push for independent commissions to take something, that was definitely done under the cloak of secrecy and to bring it out into the light of day. So basically every decision we made and every discussion we made was in public, so people could see who was influencing the process, what was being said, how we were considering it, how decisions were made. So that's a really key one. And then another value I'll mention before turning it over to Carlos is the importance of inclusivity and public access to the commission. So that thinking beyond, just providing, public comment. There are a lot of people who are not available to attend these meetings because they have 3 jobs, or, this is not the most important thing on their list. And how do you make sure that people who are generally, not included in these kind of, governmental or political processes, how do you include them? So we did things around language access, for example. We made sure that the website content was available in 6 languages, that we tried to provide simultaneous translation for a couple of key meetings where we knew that that was representative of the community that we were speaking in. So I think, thinking a little bit beyond about how do you make your proceedings accessible to people. We try to have our meetings, in the evenings or on weekends, even if we had met the whole day to discuss business, because we knew that's probably when most of the public might be available to observe us.
How about on your end, Carlos?
Well, similar to Cynthia, I felt really strongly about making sure that we took, stock of who was participating in the process and who was left behind, given that was really a motivation for me to serve on the commission. And so equity was an important animating value for me. And I think it is important that you look at, the data and the public participation process, and all of the things that you are given access to. It's important that you look at all of this dispassionately, that you look at the redistricting principles, and that you try to balance all of those together. But I think it is also important that you show up as your full self, and if there's something that you know from your own lived experience, from the communities in which you've lived, grown up, worked, raised families, and that point of view is not represented in the room. Equity means that you do feel compelled to share. And I think that it's an important, reflection for me, thinking back on the process 10 years ago, because we do get counseled wisely, to not necessarily substitute, your own personal judgment for the public's. But I do think there's a delicate balance, but there's a way to do it in a values-based way that ensures that those who haven't traditionally been heard are reflected in the final map. I also just think, for me, independence was really important, and it was a constant discipline to exercise, because I did have proximity to interests, particularly on the progressive side of the political divide, that I needed to be really careful about keeping at bay. I also knew that they didn't necessarily possess the same questions and the same trade-offs as I had to contend with as an appointed commissioner. And so I knew that I had a very high responsibility to do the work with independence. And then of course integrity. It's important that when people do take the time to participate in the public comment process, that you listen, to everyone with an open mind, and remain engaged, challenge your own prevailing thinking, and make space for people who you do not agree with, because your responsibility is to the entire community within your geography. Not just the constituency that you're most familiar. So I would say that independence, integrity, and equity were important values for our work.
So that you've raised some things there, Carlos, that I want to dive deeper into, because you talk about the variety of different voices and perspectives that were part of your broader community in San Diego County. And I know also Cynthia, being at the state level, each of you were working in geographic contexts where you were looking at urban areas and rural areas, and you were looking at all kinds of different racial and ethnic demographics, socioeconomic, et cetera. And so, you know, Cynthia, I wonder what is that process really like on how you go about integrating such diverse perspectives, even from people who might live in the same area, and trying to make a set of cohesive maps that feel fair?
Yeah, this is the fundamental challenge that you face. For us at the state level, we were lucky in the sense that the Constitution actually dictates a rank-ordered set of principles. I don't know what you have going on in San Joaquin County, but for us, we had to adhere to the rank order of different redistricting principles, which it sounds like you're going to get into a little bit more with Paul after we speak. So that was something that we would constantly have to go back and check. It's like, okay, did we make sure that we dealt with the Voting Rights Act, which is a federal law and takes precedence over the state principles, and make sure we took care of that before we go down to the other state level criteria. We, in some cases, had a criterion where it had several different aspects that the same rank order. For example, preserving the boundaries of cities, counties, neighborhoods, and communities of interest were for us at the same level. And so in this case, we relied very heavily on public input to tell us which ones were more important in different areas. So, for example, you would think it would be simple to keep cities, intact, until you realize that cities have really odd boundaries. Like often cities have their garbage dump as part of their city boundaries, and it turns out not to be contiguous with the rest of the city. And of course, no one actually lives there. So, how important is it to maintain that boundary for redistricting purposes? The city of San Francisco owns SFO, which is not contiguous. It's not actually part of San Francisco. It's actually further down in San Mateo, but that's part of the boundaries of the city and county of San Francisco. So in some cases, we would not respect the city boundaries because it didn't make sense and it would cut up other communities. In one part of the state, we heard from an area called the Four Corners area, which actually was an area over, 4 different counties. And people would say, why preserve the county boundaries, which were drawn in the 1800s? This is clearly a community here, and here's all the evidence of why this is an area, the Four Corners area, that should be preserved. And so we broke county lines for that. So I think listening to the people to understand what their interests are and what is the best way to ensure they get representation for their interests is how to think of it. So other things we looked at were, for example, environmental watersheds. This is pretty important in agriculture, but even important in urban areas. And other things, we heard about freeways, and rivers that served as absolute boundaries. But in another example, it turns out, that some of these freeways can be pollution creating areas. And so maybe you want to keep the people on both sides of the freeway together so that they can advocate to mitigate pollution. So depending on what we heard from people in the area, it would help guide us as to what is the best way to deal with the issues that are most important to the people in the area. Should we put them together so they have strong representation? In some cases, if it's enough people, could they get 2 representatives and make it important to both of them? So these were the kinds of things that you start to think through as you're trying to balance all of these issues.
Yeah,
That's really helpful. That's really helpful. It gets right to the I think the crux of you know, the complexity of the role, and where particularly the public process and the hearings and the testimony that you hear from people is actually going to help fill in the picture that accompanies what you get, which is the hard numbers from the census. Carlos, would love your thoughts on this.
I just appreciate the trade-offs, you know, that you'll have to make. They are very difficult, and I do think it's important to try to establish some sort of working theory about, you know, how you're going to prioritize the different principles of compact, contiguous communities of interest, the Voting Rights Act, and the like. You know, I think that what we tried to do is to keep representation from the perspective of whether a community had been disenfranchised, history of disenfranchisement, and quality of life issues really at the center of our process. It was important, of course, as it will be in your process, to make sure that there isn't a great deal of deviation from one district's population and another district's population. It's not something you can violate if you want to make sure that your map is legally defensible. But on the other hand, you know, there may be you know, a principle that that you ultimately end up recognizing is important, but perhaps less so than keeping a community of interest intact. So, you know, for example, we had a district in San Diego. The population had grown such that we needed to create a 9th district, but we also felt like the data was there, and the public certainly communicated the desire to have a second Latino minority city council district. And the population growth and the density that we were looking at made a defensible case for creating this second district. But in order to actually achieve the appropriate population balance and make sure that there was enough you know, of a plurality of representation to be sort of a second Latino empowerment district, we did need to really kind of reconsider whether or not it could be as compact as we wanted it to be. So when we looked at the final map, it wasn't the most compact district as it could have been, but we were able to service other really high priorities, balanced against, of course, making sure that the population was equitable to other districts, that communities that had been historically disenfranchised had an opportunity, you know, to fulfill their aspirations, that neighborhoods were kept intact. Of course, it was contiguous. It was a contiguous district, but it wasn't terribly compact. And we sort of made that trade-off, you know, recognizing that there were other higher principles at play in that instance. So it will be on a case-by-case basis that, you know, you'll need to make those determinations. You know, I think that that's why, of course, a robust public participation process is so important.
Mm-hmm. So I'll just ask for your quick thoughts on one burning question, and then we'll see if any of the committee members have questions for you, which is around the public engagement. You know, a quick piece of advice or idea that you might have as this committee gets up and running. We're in a very different moment, just being still, you know, in latter stages, hopefully, of the COVID-19 pandemic. And so just the way we go about public participation and how do you create a good public process in general, and then any particular nuances around where we are right now. So Cynthia, any quick thoughts? And then Carlos, you can close us out. We'll open up for some questions.
Yeah, so part of your role is actually to educate the public on what is valuable public input. So we got a lot of feedback that we couldn't do anything with. So educating and providing, we had like a 2-pager that just says, this is what good public input looks like. If you're identifying a community of interest, describe them, provide evidence for, how this group is defined and what the boundaries are. Because if you don't give us the boundaries, we're going to have a hard time keeping your community whole, right? So unless it's a city or a county, it's not obvious. I mean, even neighborhoods are not obvious. So, bring a real estate map. Bring school districts, other things that will help us figure out, what our relevant boundary is. So I think that's the big part, is educating the public on how to give actionable feedback so that you can actually incorporate their feedback into your map. And just a tip for these COVID times is, as just like in this meeting today, you're going to have Zoomers and you're going to have rumors. So, and that's going to be an interesting thing to manage. So, one thing is the great thing about the video conferencing technology is that it enables greater participation. So if you think about the process that, we at the California Citizens Redistricting Commission did at the state level, we would travel to a location, we would announce in advance we were coming, we would, publicize it, and then people would, drive or take the bus to get there, and they'd have to wait, hours to get their 2 minutes of public comment in. And as you can imagine, that's not, that doesn't facilitate a lot of public comment except for the most motivated. And, with a hybrid or a virtual process, people could actually, call in during the, public input period, and they can be, put in queue and, maybe, know that they'll be on in 20 minutes or something. And it just helps them manage their lives a lot more. So I think if you see this as an opportunity to get more and broader public input, and you have a way to manage it so that, forget about the people who are online. That's the challenge of the hybrid process. And maybe you alternate between people who are in the room and people who are online. Then you can, fully take advantage of this technology, because, Zoom, and I'm not, depending on, this is Zoom, so it looks like the technology you'll be using, it has the ability for closed captions, for, simultaneous translation. There are a lot of capabilities that will really help your inclusivity of trying to accommodate members of the public.
Yeah, and I would only add that I think it's important to reach out to partner with the nonprofit organizations, the service providers, the trusted authorities within civil society who are really best positioned to articulate why this process is so critically important to not only representation, but also to allocating resources across the region once the lines are drawn. And so I think recognizing where you have credibility on your commission, if there are folks who come from communities who are commissioners who are not often engaged in this process, being an ambassador yourself, I think is something to keep in mind. And then recognizing where you have real and fair credibility gaps on your commission, and partnering with those who do have more credibility in those communities. I think that's really key.
Well, thank you both. I learn something every time we chat, and I will just defer to someone who can help traffic control there in the room, and see if, I'm sure we have time for a question or two before Paul jumps on to share his portion of the training.
Do we have anyone who was online that has questions? Seeing none, how about here in the room? Any questions? have no questions here. I do have one to both individuals. First, thank you very much to both Carlos and Cynthia for your work and what you have done to support not only San Diego City, County, and the state, but from the onset, what were some of the biggest challenges that you both faced that you might be able to share with our group that we maybe have to look at, or something that we may need to consider that you were faced with through your time on the committees?
Well, let me intervene and just say, Cynthia, we don't want you to talk all night, because I think there is something to being on an inaugural committee or commission that there's so much building the plane while one is flying it. And so there were a number of just operational hiccups and things that had to be navigated, which were less germane to the redistricting itself, but really about kind of building this new function of government. But yeah, Cynthia, let's start with you, and then Carlos.
Yeah, so I'll leave out all of the controversy about that. But so we had rank ordered criteria, and things that, you know, seem like they ought to be straightforward turn out to be not so straightforward. So for example, our first rank ordered criteria was population equality. So that's actually a federal mandate, right? That districts should be about the same number of people, right? One person, one vote, right? Seems pretty straightforward. For Congress, it's very exact, right? It's exactly one person, one vote. Districts have to be exactly equal, plus or minus one person. But for every other district, state legislative districts, and certainly city and county districts, you can have some deviation. And you heard Carlos mention that. So the question is, how big is that deviation? So if you want to accomplish some of these other goals, you might want to accept a larger deviation. And one of the controversial decisions we made early on was to allow a fairly large deviation. We had, I think, plus or minus 2.5%. So that was a total deviation of 5% when we were drawing draft maps, because we kind of wanted to see what kind of districts we could, you know, create with that larger deviation. But when it came to drawing the final maps, we tightened the deviation to plus or minus 1%, which is very tight until you remember that a Senate district statewide is almost 1 million people. So, you know, 1% is a lot of people. So that's the reason that ultimately, and it was a fairly controversial decision, but ultimately the will of the commission was to go with a tighter deviation. And part of it was that we felt, as the, you know, as the trend setting, you know, first commission, that we needed our maps to be above any kind of legal reproach. So we wanted to have a pretty tight deviation and not have people claim that we were playing fast and loose with the deviations. And that was a pretty controversial decision. And a lot of community organizations pushed back. They felt like we would not be able to draw as many Voting Rights Act districts, VRA districts, which was the second ranked criterion. So that includes, you know, minority, majority districts, et cetera, because of that tighter deviation. You know, I don't think that ended up being a problem, but, you know, districts that might have been explicitly minority majority, you know, 51% plus, you know, might have ended up being an empowerment district instead, and might have been 49% instead, but it still had a really tight deviation. And ultimately we think that balanced those principles well.
I would say it's important for you to establish a go-to spokesperson. One of the things that we did is we made sure that we could distribute the work as equitably as possible across the commissioners. So I served as vice chair. We had a chair, but we did designate all spokesperson authority to our chair, because we did have a lot of incoming inquiries from the media, and it was important for us to exercise a level of message discipline, not only because we wanted to speak with one voice about the good work that we were doing and how we were making decisions as a collective, But we also recognized that it was important to manage our public comments carefully to protect the city itself from potential litigation. So I would highly advise that you think about a communications approach that either designates one or just a few clear folks who are prepared to speak with the public about the decisions that you all are making, and any controversy that external stakeholders want to make of the work you're doing. You're going to want to have somebody who can speak on your behalf.
Mhm.
You certainly don't want all commissioners having the same authority to speak on behalf of the commission.
Mhm. And this is an area where it's also good to think about the types of things that might need to be communicated on behalf of your committee. And so, Commissioner Dye talked about the importance of education. And really, you should all see yourselves as ambassadors around what is redistricting and why does it matter. Whether you intend to or not, it's going to happen. You're going to be in line at the grocery store. You're going to be at, your grandkids' school, whatever the thing is, and you're going to want to feel comfortable to be able to just say a bit about what it is and to be doing so in a way that really inspires and encourages people to participate. A way that we managed that on the state level commission was that we had a set of talking points that we developed that was sort of our marching orders. And it was something that people could opt in if they felt comfortable to be able to be in more formal roles of speaking to a community group or that kind of thing. We always had full disclosure of when there was an invitation that had been extended, who was the point person that was going to take it on, and then that person would report back to the commission and they would work with the talking points that they had. And that is a little bit different than the kind of meat and potatoes, if you will, of what the commission is actually focused on, which is drawing the lines and all of the nuances, the political and legal nuances that come with that. And that's where, the less messengers, the better, and the more precise the message, the better. So I think it's a really great and perceptive question to get ahead of that. And I know that Paul has quite a bit of robust material that you also will want to benefit from. If there's any last question, I'm open to it. Otherwise, we will go ahead and thank Cynthia and Carlos.
Ms. Baird?
Yeah, I have a question. My question is, how do you get people to engage? I've been trying to talk to people. Nobody has asked me in the grocery store line anything about this. And when I talk to them about it, they look at me as if I'm speaking Klingon. How do you, do you have a plan for outreach somehow?
Yes. So like I said, it's part of your charter to be the ambassadors to help explain why people should care about redistricting. And one of the things we did at the state levels, we took full advantage of the diversity on our commission. And we obviously deployed people who, were representative of certain communities. So you can imagine I got deployed to the Asian American community. And in fact, our public information, our director of communications had me speaking on a drive time radio show that I ended up doing half in Chinese and half in English because my Chinese is not that fluent. And I was getting really basic questions because this was a drive time show that was targeted at recent immigrants, people who worked in Silicon Valley, but, so they probably spoke English at work. They were probably educated over here, but, perhaps they felt more comfortable in their homes speaking in Chinese. And so I was getting questions like, what does Congress do? So it's really basic questions. And, something that you will struggle with, and I think you should think about is how do you make people care about this? So the joke was, if you announce you're going to have a meeting on redistricting, you'll get 5 people to show up if you're lucky. But if you announce you're going to move a public bus stop, you'll have 300 people, arguing and yelling about it in a room because people know what that means when the bus stop moves. They don't really understand redistricting. And so for my community, I ended up saying things like, don't you care about whether your kids get into the college of their choice, into Berkeley, into Stanford, whatever their choice is, then you should care about redistricting, because this is the process that, distributes, huge amounts of federal and state dollars, and it determines what kind of resources come to your community. And you want to make sure your public schools are good, right? So this is something that I know education is a key issue for the Asian community. And so that's something that I keyed my message off of. And so, I would think about, for the communities that you can be a good ambassador to, what are the things that they care about? If it's agricultural interests, they probably care about water, so think about it and then translate that into how redistricting can help them get representatives who advocate for their interests.
And this is something that could be built into a set of shared talking points, because making that bridge between what they care about and also what is really the purview of the county. When you think about these particular districts and these particular representatives that will then be connected and representing these areas, what are the things that they will actually have domain and decision-making authority over, and being able to articulate that and to have that as part of how you talk about the work that you're doing. We're also seeing across the state in all kinds of different places that that's something that just that little bit of education is also really helpful as a point of entry to many of the public hearings, as a backdrop, as you welcome and invite people to weigh in. Just a little bit about what is redistricting, what is the role of the county, it's also an educational, civics is not as robust as it used to be, as people tell me it was decades before I took it. And so as committee members, you are actually part of that educational process as well. It's a great question. And with that, I think we'll go ahead and wrap so that you can get the most out of your money tonight with Paul's presentation. Cynthia and Carlos, can't thank you enough. Really appreciate you being here and just sharing your perspectives. And for those of you here in San Joaquin County, please know that we are at the ready to support you as you go through the process. If there are other ways that we can be a resource or other questions that come up later, redistricting partners, we can certainly continue to facilitate that connection. So best of luck to you.
Thank you for having us.
Great. And now I think Paul should be ready to roll.
Howdy. Hey, Connie, how you doing?
All good.
Good. Great presentation. Well, thanks for having me. I don't know if Glenn or Chris in San Joaquin want to take a little break at all, or if we want to just dive right into it, but I'm happy to get started as I've been sitting here watching that and I'm ready to go.
Continue on.
All righty, great, thanks. So first off, thanks for having me here, and thanks for having us and Connie here. That presentation, really some all-stars in the districting space, the redistricting process, has almost no better ambassadors than Connie, Cynthia, and Carlos. So I'm really happy that you got a chance to meet with them. So I'm going to go through what's essentially a 101. This is going to cover a lot of topics. I'll be conscious of the time and make sure that we're getting this done by 5 o'clock, and hopefully leave some time for a little bit of Q&A if folks have questions. I'm going to cover a number of topics, and these are things that you'll hear talked about over and over. What is redistricting? Some information about the State and Federal Voting Rights Act. What gerrymandering is, go over the traditional redistricting principles, census data and when this is going to be released and how that works, and then also going over the timeline for the RAC. Let me just get the thing there. So what is redistricting? redistricting, and we're going to go over this over and over, but it's the process of balancing districts. Needs to be conducted every decade after the census. And the idea is balancing and making these districts equal, but there's actually two fundamental reasons behind it. They're very, very similar, but they are a little bit different. So I'll explain it real quickly. The first is equal representation. That's covered under the 14th Amendment. And you can think of that as equal voice when, say, a streetlight goes out in your neighborhood. If you have equal political power as other people in the county, then when your streetlight goes out, you have somebody you can go to at the county level or at the city level, or if your kid is having trouble with school, at the school board level. And each time that you go to your government, your access to elected officials is equal to the access to elected officials for people in the other side of town. And that equality is destroyed essentially when you have districts that are not equally balanced. And in one example, we did a redistricting in an agency that hadn't redistricted since 1950. And in their districts, they had one district that had 8,000 people and another district that had 100,000 people. So in that instance, if somebody had a streetlight go out in the area with 8,000 people, they had a representative. They were only one of 8,000 people in that district, and they had pretty good access to them. For the person in the 100,000 person district, if their streetlight went out, they're just one of 100,000 people. Their voice to get their issue addressed is mathematically 1 in 12 strength of the other person. So it would take them and 11 of their neighbors to have the equivalent political voice and representation. The second principle is one man, one vote, one person, one vote. And this is very similar in that everybody who gets to vote for supervisor has an equal voice in that election. There's a little conflict between these two principles sometimes because that example I gave with the 8,000, 100,000, when you actually looked at registered voters, it was more like 7,000 and 80,000. And so the ratio wasn't exactly the same as the 12-1, maybe it was 11-1. But still, there's this idea that people's voices should be equal and you should have that ability for your vote to equal the same as everybody else's. When these two are in conflict, the Supreme Court right now has sided towards the equal representation argument. And when we do balance districts, we're going to be balancing them based on total population. But we can look at, the eligible voters as well as part of the calculation. The redistricting process has undergone significant changes, and that's represented by what you're doing here today. There have been different venues in which redistricting has changed. In federal law, it's changed by a significant elimination of Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act. This nationally has big implications. It has big implications in California, particularly in some counties. But essentially, the section that was eliminated required pre-clearance of any redistricting plans. There have also been Supreme Court decisions like the one I just alluded to, where they made a decision recently in a Texas case that went all the way to the Supreme Court that when we're balancing districts, we're balancing based on total population. There have been other Supreme Court decisions, including one where the entire system that Connie and Cynthia ran with the 2011 commission process, that was taken all the way to Supreme Court in an Arizona case questioning the validity of commissions. And fortunately, the commissions prevailed and we are here today. HR 1 is a bill that has been debated in Congress, but it would extend a lot of the redistricting policy to all states, requiring all states to use commissions. In California, we've seen changes. Props 11 and 20 created the statewide redistricting commission, and then the California Fair Maps Act imposed a lot of the same kind of requirements on local government. And that's the process that we're going to be conducting this redistricting under. Also, in public opinion and in the media, there's been significant change. A massive amount of support in the public for taking redistricting out of the back rooms and making it open and transparent. Also, similarly high numbers of support for citizen drawn plans, advisory committees, commissions, all of that to try to affect a different kind of redistricting has gained significant voter support. It's kind of interesting that the ballot measure that created the statewide redistricting commission narrowly passed, but in today's environment, it would probably get 3/4 of the voters' support at least. Another thing that's changed a lot is that the media now has better tools and pays more attention to redistricting. We're seeing in the media already articles about the redistricting process. In other states, we're seeing newspapers being able to put out articles that include maps or interactive tools to look at maps. So a lot of this stuff has been significantly altered. 20 years ago, maybe there'd be 1 or 2 articles about the statewide redistricting while it was actually happening. And we probably have 1 or 2 articles a week right now about the statewide redistricting. The State and Federal Voting Rights Act, I'm going to go over both of these, but the first part, the Federal Voting Rights Act, I already talked about Section 5, which is inactive right now, but Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act is something that I know the last panel touched on, and some of the challenges with Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. And Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act gets into that idea of having majority-minority districts. And there are many cases in which those are required to be drawn in order to comply with federal law, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. Some people might say to you, well, what about the California Voting Rights Act? That's what you're following. In fact, when we meet with agencies, a lot of the time they ask us about the California Voting Rights Act, but the reality is it has nothing to do with this redistricting process. The California Voting Rights Act only applies to agencies that don't have districts yet. And it sets the conditions by which they are required or forced to go to district elections. When we get into Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, or if there's ever any questions in the line drawing process about Section 2, you're going to see me and other redistricting partners, staff that are involved in this process, hand it to the lawyers. Because the redistricting process and the requirements to follow Section 2 it's very important that the lawyers are the ones leading that conversation, and that we're constantly looking to them for answers on this. The issue isn't, is a district going to be 50% of one minority population? Because that's a relatively easy question. The data to define that is available, and drawing districts that have certain populations of Latinos, Asians, African Americans, or other populations, and getting those calculations is not the hard part. Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act doesn't just say create majority minority districts. It also requires that that minority group be sufficiently compact and that you can draw a district that is 50% within the normal constraints of the districting process. It also requires that that minority population be politically cohesive, meaning that they block vote, or that they vote for candidates of choice regularly, or vote in a cohesive manner on issues. And that minority population, that while they vote cohesively on these issues, there's some other group, or the majority, that votes against them on issues in a way that defeats their preferred candidate. And the key to this is that if there's a situation where the minority population is continually trying to elect somebody a candidate of choice, and they are continually unable to do that, then the question is there something about the election system that's causing that? And in this case, is there something about the way districts are constructed that could be relieved if districts were constructed in a different way? And so under Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, we want to know, could a potential district have the effect of allowing that protected class, that minority population, to elect a candidate of choice? Is it effective? There's also some emerging Voting Rights Act kind of norms around this, having to do with potential for coalition districts, meaning that there might be one or more minority populations that vote cohesively and could be a majority of a district. We don't see that as much in California, but it is something that we're seeing around the country and it might come up. If we have a situation where the attorneys have said, you have a requirement under Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act to draw a district that's a majority minority, it allows us to look more significantly at the racial composition of these districts as we're drawing lines. However, unless we have that green light, then we are not allowed to draw districts wherein the race of the population was a predominant factor in the drawing of lines. So we want to make sure that we use language to not say, oh, that's the Latino district or that's the Asian district, because the districts can't be drawn or created primarily with that as the main construct or reason why they were drawn that way. So we'll work with your legal counsel, and if these questions come up in the county, we'll work together on getting answers and helping with that process. What is gerrymandering? Whenever I say I do redistricting, that's the first thing that somebody says. They've heard about gerrymandering. And gerrymandering comes from this political cartoon, the Gerrymander. It was Governor Gary, one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence. Honestly, he didn't even like this redistricting plan, but he was governor at the time. And so he kind of got it pinned on him that he was the namesake now of these redistricting practices. Governor Gary's original gerrymander was 200 years ago. Most people think it's like some old timey thing, like that doesn't happen anymore. But that is a state Senate district the legislature drew the last time they had the power to draw district lines. And to me, that's got the head, it's got the wings, it's got some talons. It's basically the same original gerrymander. And it does bridge together one of the most affluent Asian parts of San Gabriel Valley in Los Angeles with downtown LA, essentially. It's a district that you wouldn't see in a fair, open, non-gerrymandered redistricting process. If you were in college and studied gerrymandering, you might get into this exercise. It's a little game theory exercise where we would give people these 9 little triangles and ask them to draw 3 districts really quick, and they would draw something like this, either 3 horizontal districts or 3 vertical districts. But if we gave it to somebody who wanted to be a little bit sneaky, they could draw that and create 2 districts that are green and 1 district that is yellow. So in this kind of a construct, you would expect the result of an election to be what's referred to as proportional. So the yellow, which is the largest portion of this area, would have the ability to elect a candidate of their choice 2 out of 3 times. But now they have the ability to elect a candidate of their choice 1 out of 3 times. And the Greens have, by drawing the lines in a creative way, been able to take a disproportionate share of the seats. So what we are trying to do is eliminate from this process these kind of gerrymanders. And there's actually 3 kinds of gerrymanders traditionally. Partisan gerrymandering is what we hear a lot about. And this commission is disallowed from using partisanship as any part of the criteria or drawing districts to advantage or disadvantage political parties. The Supreme Court has said that they cannot hear cases on partisan gerrymandering anymore. They basically punted it to the states and state lawmakers and local lawmakers to try to end partisan gerrymandering. Racial gerrymandering is something that the courts have said that they will continue to adjudicate, and racial gerrymandering is effectively drawing districts to reduce the opportunity for minorities to elect a candidate of their choice. The 2 primary ways in which that's done is one called cracking, where if you have a core, say in Georgia, you have a core Black population, and you were to draw, this is the Black population in my bigger county, and you were to draw 5 districts, and each district took 1 portion of that Black population, but making that Black population a significant minority in every district, then that would be considered cracking. You're dividing up their political voice into multiple districts and denying them an opportunity to have an effective voting coalition in any district. Cracking is the primary way, but packing is the secondary way. let's say that Black community gets bigger and bigger, and it has a political voice, and they have an opportunity to elect a candidate of choice from a district there. But what they've done in that is they actually were large enough to be the majority of 2 districts. But the people doing the redistricting got a little sneaky, and they said, okay, that could be 2 districts where the Black community would have majority minority districts, but we'll instead create one 80% Black district, and in effect, shoving as many Black voters into one district and denying them the opportunity to elect a candidate of choice in that second seat. This was adjudicated very recently in the last couple of years in Virginia, where they essentially did that. They had a district that was like 70% citizen voting age population African American, and the courts told them that they had to create 2 districts that could be effective for the Black community in that state and force them to redraw. The third kind of gerrymandering is one that's actually more pernicious and harder to identify, but really has seeped into almost all local governments around the country, and it's incumbent gerrymandering. And sometimes people don't think that this is something that is actually a problem. There are a lot of instances in the past where agencies would say, okay, it's redistricting time. Let's get the address of every incumbent, and then we'll hand that to the planning commission or and some areas, they actually do have the planning commission draw districts, but maybe hand it to the department and have them send us back some sample maps where we can all just run for re-election in our districts. And not always inherently damaging to the communities, but it is also a criteria that oftentimes lends itself to crazy district lines that are drawn in order to figure out a way to make sure every incumbent is reelected, and making that the primary criteria over all the others that could go into a good redistricting. And so in California, in the Fair Maps Act, we now can no longer consider incumbents or candidate addresses as a community of interest in the line drawing process. So that is a big change for this state. And we're actually working with a number of agencies around the state that aren't under that requirement, water districts, community colleges, school boards, and others, and encouraging them to also follow that as a best practice. Traditional redistricting principles are how we draw districts in a way that makes sure that things aren't a gerrymander. And I'll go through these pretty quickly. First off, relatively equal size. I know you heard about this earlier. I heard Carlos talking about it. And the idea is that we're going to have districts that are equal size in order to have that fair representation. And we're going to make them equal based on people. And one of the definitions that I heard on the last panel was the idea of a deviation. And what that means is that if you have a district that is supposed to be 1,000 people per district, and you have one that's 1,100 people and one that's 900 people, each of those districts is been deviated a little bit from that ideal. And when we look at redistricting, Cynthia mentioned that in Congress, you have a 1-person deviation for the districting lines. So 1-person deviation means that in the state redistricting process for Congress, each congressional district has 702,904 people. Now in the new redistricting in statewide congressional, I think Chris, who's there in person, might know it by heart already, but I think it's around 760,532, something like that. That will be the new population for each congressional district. And in fact, while we know the statewide population number, it'll adjust a little bit based on prison population. Now, local government is allowed a 10% buffer. So that means that the total overpopulated district and the total underpopulated district, that they can't be more than 10% apart. So if one district's over 5% and another district's under 5%, that's right at your 10% metric. But you could also have one district over 7% and the other districts all under by 2%. And so your metric now is 9% deviation. So that total deviation is required to be at 10%. And one of the things I really liked in the earlier conversation was this question about when you have these deviations, how important is this numeric part of the districting process? As Cynthia mentioned, that Other agencies, even the State Redistricting Commission, will sometimes impose like a narrower deviation upon themselves with the idea that a districting plan with a narrower deviation is somehow better than a districting plan with a wide variation or wide deviation. And I just want to caution you at the outset that that might not always be true. The deviation is there, and it's an opportunity for you to look at different districting plans and potentially use up all of that deviation in drawing districts where maybe you want to keep a city whole, or maybe you want to make sure that that a district isn't jumping over the highway just to get, you know, an extra 80 people so the district can be within a certain arbitrary deviation. So you want district plans that make sense, and that deviation allows you a little wiggle room to make sure that your districts are keeping communities of interest whole, keeping what other geographies you want whole, and drawing a plan that you want and can support, rather than getting into a game of trying to get every district to one person. That one person deviation is just silly. It really, at the end of the day, forces people in positions like mine to go into a redistricting plan around edges of a district and literally grab like, okay, 10 people here, now I'm 4 people over, okay, 2 people here, now I'm 2 people over, okay, then 1 person here, and then I'm done. And those selections are always really arbitrary and not really supported by kind of a rational principle. They're just done in order to meet this metric. So we'll be talking more about that, I'm sure. The contiguous is both easy and a little bit nuanced. So contiguous means whole parts touching. The entire county is one unit. It's all one unit touching. LA County isn't, right? LA County is LA County, but then there's Catalina Island that doesn't touch. So when we think about redistricting, we want districts to be drawn based on whole units. And if something isn't touching, we'll draw it to its most adjacent, or, you know, how you get there kind of area. But there's also the idea that some things might be literally contiguous, but not functionally contiguous. If we had a district and in the middle of the district was the aqueduct, and you've got houses over here and houses over here, those houses could like throw a Frisbee to each other. But maybe to get from one house to the other, you have to drive 5 miles and go around to where you can cross over the aqueduct and come back down. So that idea of contiguous isn't just that they are touching from like a satellite photo, but also that they're functionally contiguous. One terminology sometimes uses travel contiguous. So meaning that you can get from one side of the district without having to drive out of the district to get back in. Maintaining communities of interest was discussed earlier a lot. The idea is that we have these minority populations that might be protected under the Federal Voting Rights Act, but what other criteria do we use beyond that? You might use workforces. You might use something like the LGBTQ population. You might use something like people's travel patterns, who uses public transportation, who uses certain city services. One key element of all of this is that you want to try to find community of interest that can be mapped and that have a relationship back to the local government. So these 3 things, the idea of a shared characteristic, a footprint that could go into a district, and the relationship back to the county, is what really is important to the process as we go through the community of interest testimony. Following city and county lines, that is a part of the process based on the Fair Maps Act. The Fair Maps Act says regarding counties, to the extent practicable, I think practicable is one of those words we hear all the time in redistricting. The geographic integrity of a city or census designated place shall be respected in a manner that minimizes its deviation or division. So that is going to be one of the guiding things, is trying to keep cities and census places whole. Keeping districts compact, that is both in look and also in function. So something weird like this is a non-compact shape. And we actually have laws on the books around the country that will do things like, it says you cannot draw districts that have funny shapes. But in California, we have a really specific definition about compactness, and I'm going to describe it a little bit here in detail. But the actual language of the law is that a district is compact if it's not bypassing nearby populated areas in favor of more distant populated areas. Now, that's like a word salad. You have to read it a couple of times for really to sink in, but I'll show an example of, or a couple examples of it that really highlight it. This red district is an actual district in a city council. And if I started in A and I'm a homeowner in A, I would see my neighbors there. Like there's my neighbors here, and that should maybe be a district, and it's all makes sense. It's all nearby population. There's even the 80 in between these two areas, so a big highway between the two. So that would probably be the nearby populated area. But there's a far away populated area. There's across the freeway, across a golf course, and then into a totally different neighborhood. Even getting into that other neighborhood, you go a completely different direction. So not very contiguous and definitely a faraway population. And when this redistricting was done, they actually connected A and D instead of connecting it to nearby population. And this would be a district that would not be legal in California law, except for maybe some very, if there were there would have to be some, pretty crazy circumstances to require this kind of a district line. Another agency that did a redistricting that wouldn't comply with the current law, this blue district, the purple district, the orange district, I mean, all these districts are essentially hard to justify based on connecting different faraway populations and avoiding nearby populations. Both of these cities, by the way, are doing their redistricting this year, so we think we'll be getting better lines in this coming cycle. So Fair Maps Act also adds these criteria that we not consider incumbents or candidates, not use political party, hold a certain set of hearings, encourages public engagement, and that all of the information that is being shared and every decision that's being made, every map that's created is preserved for the public. So in 10 years from now, the 2030 Commission could be coming back and watching this exact video. So right now, the deadline is December 15th for the Fair Maps Act. This might change a little bit. On a call today with county registrars talking about if this deadline might change by 3 weeks or a month or so. But we'll continue to update you as we find out more. So census data, I'm going to go through this a little quick because I want to be conscious of the time. But we have in the census data, not just one monolithic thing. It's not like you just say, here's your census data. Census data includes two types of data. It includes the geography, which is the census blocks. And it also includes the data. And the data isn't just one kind of data. There's some data that's point in time, like April 1st, 2020, where was this person living? And you count that, and that's a point in time snapshot. Other data that's averaged over a 5-year period. So we'll see both of those pieces of data in our process. The census geography is these blocks, block groups, and tracts that are all in a set of data called the Tiger files. And the way they look is interesting. And this is just an area that I have up from that shows kind of like a good set of different lines and community. And if we look at this area and we look at this jumble of tiny little areas, some that have 0 people, some that have 111 people. I see one that has 66 people. All of this, these are all the tiny little census blocks. So you can see them laying right on top of the map. Then when we look at the census block groups, these are combinations of census blocks. So it's census blocks. And if you looked at an area, this is just collapsing all those census blocks and summing them up. And then all these blocks are then combined and summed up into tracts. All these, so it goes blocks, block groups, and then tracts. And so there's no crossing of these boundaries. So when a block is put into a block group, it's perfectly put in. And then when block groups are put into tracts, they're all perfectly put in. And that allows us to take different areas and when we're drawing districts, be able to give you the actual census data, no matter where we draw the line along either the block, the tract, the block group or the block area. The census data is late, but we'll likely have the legacy format, which is the initial census data, by August 16th. And then the state is going to have to do some work to adjust prison population, be able to make it usable for the redistricting process for cities and counties. And we expect to have that probably around the end of September. Now, all of that stuff was about the data, the GIS files, the shape files, the physical geography of the census, and then that decennial census file. But there's also this American Community Survey, which is a set of multi-year averages that allows us to get information like the citizen voting age population. We know citizenship was not on the decennial census questionnaire, but it is included in a 5-year package that goes to 3.5% of households every year and allows us to get a lot more context about the residents. So other data sets can be utilized. We might see, as an example, data sets coming from outside groups that identify, again, the LGBTQ population is one that's been active at the statewide level and local level, but also environmental groups. You might get data from them that shows where there's, air pollution, or where there's noise pollution, or where there's, healthcare concerns or higher asthma rates. And those can be used as data sets that lay on top of the census data. So any of these kind of things can be utilized in conjunction with the actual census data to help you draw boundaries. Now, finally, the RAC timeline. We're right now here on June 30th. You're going to have additional trainings, and then you're going to go into a series of workshops. And then in the October through November period, you're going to be getting into actual draft maps, and ultimately reaching a recommended map that you'll be sending back to the county supervisors. And I think that you should have all this information. Now, let's take one last bit here, and I've got just a few minutes. I'm going to go over the existing districts a little bit. So the existing districts, you probably have looked at them before. The data that we have in here for the population of these districts is based on the current population of the districts. And as you can see, there is underneath the current population numbers, underneath these current population numbers is the deviation, meaning how far away each of these districts are from the ideal size, from the perfect size of a district. So you can see District 1 is underpopulated by almost 10% itself. And District 5 is overpopulated almost by 5% itself. And if we were to sum these two up, you would find that the sum of these two should be 14.2. And that means the total deviation of this plan would be 14.2, meaning the sum of the absolute values of the smallest and the largest, and the difference between these two numbers. We have data in here for different populations, whether it's people who are Latino, Asian, or Black, and then in addition to that, one that is for people who are not identified with a citizen voting age population ethnicity. If we go to individual districts, we can see District 1, and I actually have a little breakout of this area, and it shows two things here. It shows each of the census places that are in this district. A census place is not just a city, but it also might be a recognized town or area in the county that is probably unincorporated, but has been designated by the census as a place. Each of these has a population, and it has a share of that area that is in this district. So Stockton, 37% of Stockton is in this district, 107,000 people. On the right-hand side, we can see the breakdown in the population based on its ethnicity of the total population and of the citizen voting age population. What's interesting is on that right side, you can see that the district has 61% Latino, but its citizen voting age population is 48% Latino, very, very close to majority minority Latino. Below those bar charts actually is another map where you can see where this district's located. So if you wanted to look where's District 1, you could zoom in there. District 2 and District 2's population, and it includes Stockton. Again, it looks like roughly the remainder of Stockton, and then other census places. District 3, a little more Stockton, Manteca, and other census places along with those populations on the right-hand side with their breakdowns. District 4 with a number of census places. It has Stockton, but it's 0 people, so it's likely just a census block or a little area that is technically in Stockton, but nobody resides there. And then District 5, again, with their populations and the share of those census places that are in that district. These have been provided for you to kind of have a little look at the districts and their current population based on US Census estimates. We're not able to utilize this data to draw actual redistricting lines, but we can have access to the data in order for us to kind of look at what is possible to come from the final data set that comes from the census. The census data will likely not match these exact numbers that I provided for you for a couple reasons. One is the census is a different type of counting. It counts how many people were living at that address on one day every decade. And it goes and does that through a process of online surveys, mailed surveys, and then people walking door to door. The other data set, the estimates come from the American Community Survey, which is just a mailed survey. They might have some follow-up, but not as much. And it's much more prone to errors over time. So we'll see what the final numbers are. But if a district looks like it's overpopulated by the American Community Survey, it's probably going to be overpopulated when the final census comes. It's just that the numbers won't be exactly right. It's just a way for us to think about it to get started. The other thing that's going to impact the final data is that not only is it counted differently, but it will go through a process of reallocating any prison population. So anybody who's in a state facility within the county will be taken out of that census block and be reallocated to whatever census block they were living in prior to their incarceration. And so that would be a removal of population from the county. And then anybody who was incarcerated right now in Kern County, but their place of residence prior to being arrested was in San Joaquin, they would be reallocated back into San Joaquin. So we might see some population leaving and then some population coming back. And it's impossible to tell right now what the actual impact would be of that change, although it's probably not going to be that significant on the population coming back side, because it's going to be, maybe 90,000 people statewide that are going to be distributed all around the state. So with that, I will go ahead and close. And if we have any questions or something else you want me to touch on, I'm more than happy to do that.
Is there anyone online that has questions for Paul? How about here? Paul, apparently there's no questions for you.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Sonia, do we have any comments from anyone? No comments? Okay, we'll go, anyone on the, who is on the committee have any comments, any questions? Who's online?
Quick question. Oh, sorry. I know we have binders. Is this PowerPoint going to be included in the binder, or this was just educational? It was a lot of good information, so I was just wondering if that will be included in our binders in the future or not. That's my question.
We have an answer for you.
Yes, we'll send out a PDF of the presentation with all the slides, so you guys can read it at your leisure.
Excellent question. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Anyone else online? Here? Yes, Ms. Ibeck? Yes, ma'am. Right there.
Excellent information. Thank you. Oh my gosh.
No, it is
Green.
on.
Yeah.
You just need to be close enough for him.
Let me get it a little closer. So I found the discussion of the panel to be particularly relevant and timely on the matter of standard talking points and having a plan for the way in which we interact with the community. I've been approached by the League of Women's Voters and asked if I'd be willing to talk about the redistricting. And I'm presuming that what we'd want to do is all make sure that, I assume, encourage us, but to make sure that we all have the same things that we're saying to the groups, and that might be easier said than done. But
Thank you.